Welcome to the Secret Underground Laboratory Recovery and Salvage, where rude mechanicals do magic. Hello, I'm Bronze Edge, Director of the Secret Underground Laboratory Recovery and Salvage, and welcome to another episode of Chair Hospital's Orthopedic Ward, where this piece is not only coming apart, we've got a few fractures to be repaired as well. Now this chair is slightly under scale for what we usually see, especially in what I considered a dining chair. It is about 17 inches, whereas most chairs would be around 18. It is only 13 inches wide, which again is fairly small, 14 front to back, but it does mean that the seat is one single slab. The mortise and tenon joinery here is a little unusual. These are rounded off and slightly smaller. And so we've got a rounded mortise, which certainly is easier to cut with a drill, and then a little small rabbet that the seat back fits into. We've got a split right here, as well as a broken stretcher right here, and that's what we're going to have to be working on today. Now this piece that's chipped here is moved in two separate directions, so I know it's loose. And this is going to be glued together, and I think a pin is probably appropriate. I'm using Type Bond 2. That's what I've got on the shelf. Type Bond 3, Type Bond 1 would probably work just as well for this particular application. Just want to get a good coat on both sides. Put this back into place. Try to get all the edges lined up, but they never lined up perfectly. Give me a little bit of a start here. With a bit, just a little smaller than 1/8 of an inch. I want to go as far as I can. That gets me in both sides. And then for the pin, I use barbecue skewers. This type, the light white ones, not good to use. These are regular wood. The darker ones, that's bamboo. And that has much greater shear strength for this kind of a job than regular wood does. And after all, this is just about 1/8 of an inch. Get it hammered down in there. And after it dries overnight, I'll trim that off and it will be ready to go. Now this is a Windsor style chair, and really all that means simply is that the seat is a solid piece of wood. The legs and the back stick into holes in the slab. And that also means the legs splay out at an angle. Now in your standard pub style chair where everything is square and straight, the stretchers go in at a 90-degree angle. But in a Windsor chair, they're always at an angle. So I have to figure out what this angle is. And I know by putting it on two pieces of curved wood that that's not exactly accurate. So what I'm going to do, take my calipers, measure right here. Then I set it to 0. And I go and I measure here. And I see I've got 3/8 more or less. So to compensate for that, I got a little 3/8 block of wood that I'll put right there. I'll do the same thing at this point. come up here, see the difference, 3/8 again, and I've got another little block of wood. I'll stick right there, and then I'll put it like that, and I've got just about as accurate a measurement of that angle as I'm going to get. Now, for most chair making, the legs start out as a square piece of stock, flat sides, square corners. Makes it very easy to make pencil marks and measure, and you can get your angle pretty precise. I don't have that luxury since this has been turned down on a lathe, and there's not a flat spot or a square corner anywhere on it. So I have made this jig, which will hold it in place. And I can eyeball getting this as close to vertical as possible. And this will hold it nice and tight. Now, to deal with the angle, I've got my T-bevel, and I've got a square, which is as close to vertical as I'm really going to need it. And I can raise this up, put this block underneath it, and within the limits of the precision of the human eye, get this angle pretty much straight up and down. Now we're at the Packard Precision 12-speed drill press. I've got my jig clamped down 6 ways from Sunday. This big piece of square stock on the back will give me the rigidity, because this jig is fairly flimsy, even though it does set up easily. Got a 5/8 Forstner bit going into oak, so I am running at 500 RPM, and the alignment is what Mr. Pete would call by guess and by gosh. Now I'm looking at the broken stretcher. For this kind of a job, it would be simple enough to simply make another one on the lathe. If this was broken right along the hole here, that's probably what I'd be doing. But it's a perfectly good piece of wood. And I'm going to use a technique to make this just a little bit longer. I call a tenon in a tenon. Now, tenon in a tenon means drilling a mortise in the end of the stretcher and inserting a piece. Which, as you can see, since this piece is about the same size as the stretcher, there's really not enough material here to drill a hole. So what I've got is a part that's been turned down to 1/2 inch, and I'm going to try and center that as closely as possible. And when that's glued in, there should be enough wood on the outside here to support it, and it'll be back to its full function. Now, this is my universal drilling tall skinny things jig. It's basically this piece of wood here and this post in the middle, and I've got them trimmed down to where they're basically as square as practically possible, and all these little blocks are fastened onto it depending on what the job is. In this case, I've got these two spaced so they're at the same diameter and on the taper, and they're going to hold it nice and straight. Now, whenever I make a jig, I like it to be a one-handed operation where I'm not having to hold something and tighten the clamp at the same time. So I've got something like this little piece, and all I have to do to get it in place, and now I get this centered under my drill bit and we'll be ready to go. Now I'm going to drill a hole in the end of a piece of wood that's about 5/8 of an inch and then tapering to slightly larger. So the possibility of this whole thing splintering apart is very real. So to try and reduce that, I've got this collar, which I've cut a taper into. It's pretty close, and it's going to fit snug on that thing, and that'll give some extra support to the wood on the outside, so make it less likely this whole thing just blows up in my face. A little loose. I think I'm going to remake this so it'll hold in that hole a little tighter. Oh yeah, that looks much better. This is the dry fit, which is the most important part of any assembly involving glue. I've got all the parts and pieces labeled, right front, right rear, whatever where they're supposed to be. I've even got the seat labeled right and left because it's upside down and they're backwards. Now, I'm not going to record the entire glue up, mainly because it's tedious, it's stressful, and it doesn't make good video. I'm using hide glue because that was what was originally used, and also because if it ever has to be taken apart again sometime in the future, you won't have to destroy the entire chair to get it apart. Now, clamping chairs is always a problem because there's no flat spaces to grab hold of, so I always go back to the old rope trick. And this will draw all the legs in towards the center, keep them nice and tight so that there's very little chance of any of these joints slipping, because I'm fixing to turn this over and put the top together. Glue drips are just a reality you have to deal with, so I prepare ahead, trying to shield as much, and that will save me a good bit of cleanup time. I'll check to make sure I've got the top level. That looks good. Then I'll be on drip patrol for about another 10 or 15 minutes, and then it sits overnight. There'll be a little touch up to do on the spots that got sanded and on the piece of the tenon that I extended. Otherwise, it's ready to go. Well, this is Bronze Age for the Secret Underground Laboratory Recovery and Salvage, and thank you for sitting through this episode of Chair Hospital. We'd appreciate it if you would hit the thumbs up button, subscribe if you haven't already. Any questions on chair repair, lighting repair, animal husbandry, Greek philosophy, even English literature, I'm happy to answer. So again, thank you for watching.